Tape is rolling.
Tape is rolling. Okay, everyone, welcome to 100 Years of Heinlein the Primer. This panel is about exactly what you think it's about. The master's work is extensive. There's some stuff that is undoubtedly better than others. And if you're not familiar with Heinlein's body of work, if you've only read one or two things, where should you go next? If you've never read anything, where should you start? It's very difficult, I think, for someone that's new to fandom or new to sci-fi to fathom this kind of a thing, because the work is so extensive, and especially with Heinlein and some of the other masters too. There's such a diversity of opinion about what is best and where to start that a panel like this would be fun. And my name is Micah. I'm on the panel because I suggested it. I've also been a Heinlein reader since I was 15, and at one point or another I have read everything that he's written, with the possible exception of some of the non-fiction. And I'm going to pass it to my left.
My name is James Zavaglia, and traditionally I do media panels, but I've been reading Heinlein for close to 30 years, and I've always enjoyed him, always loved stories. One of the original masters coming out of the joint gambling days. And I think a lot of this is things that he's written, even though some of it may appear a little dated, the basic message is still true. It's actually very good writing, and he really kind of hits the point home. And he kind of helped him go back home since he was born in Missouri. A lot of it's just good old-fashioned Missouri sense.
Pass over here.
Hi, I'm Eugene Heller, and I'm really not sure why I'm on this panel, but I read Heinlein. I've been reading Heinlein for as long as these people have.
I think you're here because you signed up for it.
It's all Rachel's fault, and I'll sit and I'll chat about it. Hello, Joe.
That's a pretty good reason.
Are you here with us?
Yeah,
Yes, please.
We're at
I
another
was trying to
person.
find William Doss. I couldn't even find MS Doss.
Nowadays,
that has just been
that can be a little
recorded for
difficult.
Yeah.
But you can find it on my machine.
All right.
So why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, I'm Joe Ross. It rhymes with Doss. And I guess I'm here because I said I was interested. I've been reading Heinlein for a long time and haven't read all of his stuff, but I kind of like what I did read. And I keep reading the ones that I haven't read yet. So here I am.
And I'm Terry Franklin, a writer of science and science fiction, and a little bit of politics on the side, which Heinlein did an awful lot of. I've read pretty close to everything he's written. I think his total works were something like 40 books. I've probably read 35 or so. He's like one of my favorites and always has been.
That's an excellent segue to what I would like to have as our first question. We have 5 people, so hopefully we'll all disagree on this at least a little. What was your first Heinlein book? Would you like to go first, James?
Sure, why not? The first Heinlein book, I want to say Have Space Over Travel.
Yeah.
Very good book. Of course, it's one of the Jubilees. I believe it was also one of the ones he put in for Boys Life with the Boy Scouts. So very upbeat, basically following the Scouts codes. Nice little story, a little bit of a near future, considering it was written in 1958, and just essentially, it was a good little happy. It's a good little happy story with a happy ending, but also at the same time, it was kind of in my opinion, even my first time reading it, it's thought-provoking, and even as a juvie novel, raised some questions that you should be asking yourself as you're growing up.
That's a very common theme in his work. The scouting thing too. Farmer in the Sky also has a very strong scouting theme. As a scout, when I first discovered those, it felt kind of good when I first started reading those. I was still a scout when I was reading them. But it felt really good to see that something that was written 30 years before I was born, it was relevant to me. So being able to take that further into Heinlein's reading as I discovered more was definitely one of the reasons why I kept at it. But my first Heinlein is probably the one that a lot of people get first, which is Stranger in a Strange Land. I may be one of the few people that doesn't think it's his best work. I I really like it. Oh, you too? Yeah, I love it. I'm glad that I did that first, because if I had found the wrong book first, I might have felt differently about the rest of his writing. But Stranger is a wonderful story. And do yourself a favor, if you haven't read it, don't read the abridged version. The unabridged, it doesn't really change much. You know, they did manage to cut mostly superfluous stuff. But I'd rather read it in the original. You know, the original Klingon. It's better. Terry?
Well, I heard about Stranger in a Strange Land when I was in elementary school. I mean, I remember various teachers talking about it as this amazing book. And of course, it wasn't a juvenile, so I don't know why they were recommending it to like 5th graders. But it's sort of like one end bearing out the other. I didn't really get into reading Heinlein until I was in college, and I believe Moon is a Harsh Mistress was the first one I read. And I read, I guess, in my college years, pretty much read all of his books at that point, and I've been rereading them on occasion since then. And one thing you said at the beginning was, you know, some of his books are better than other ones. On certain level, I mean, on one level, they're all good. They're all great adventure stories.
Yes.
Any book he wrote was a great adventure story. Some of them are only adventure stories, and other ones are adventure stories with a lot of really deep philosophy in them.
I don't know, I will fear no evil is a little light on the adventure, I'd say.
I agree with you on that one, but one of the questions after we're done with this is going to be, what's your least favorite Heinlein? So start thinking about that. Let's continue
I have
along.
actually a follow-up question, so I want to go last. I'm going to pass on to Joe.
Okay.
Oh, all right, well, I've been trying to remember. I think the first Heinlein I read was probably his short story, The Green Hills of Earth. And I loved it. And I read it again. I read it a few more times. I think the first novel was probably Starship Troopers. I think that was the first actual novel of his that I read. And then Glory Road was coming out in its magazine serialization, and I started reading that. I wasn't as thrilled with that one, I have to say. I've read a number of the others since. I liked The Moon as a Harsh Mistress, which I also read in its magazine serialization. I've kind of gone back and been reading the juveniles since then. I have not yet gotten around to reading Stranger in a Strange Land. I'm a little bit afraid to tackle it. And I think that I will read the abridged version at least first. And if I like it enough, I may go and read the other version. But
I've heard people say they're intimidated by, who haven't read it. You know, they've heard so much about it and they're intimidated. It's a fun book. Don't be afraid of it.
All right,
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
we'll see how I react to it when I get to it.
I don't remember, honestly, which one I read first. It's one of three. It could have been not Moon as Fat Space Will Travel. So I remember precisely the circumstances under which I read that, and it was early, but I don't know that I hadn't read something else, a couple of other things off my parents' bookshelf before that, and those would have been Revolt in 2100, which would have been an odd book to start with.
Very odd.
Or the collection 6xH, which kind of morphed into various other things later. And I remember reading Have Space It Will Travel, and I remember sort of, the same reaction that an awful lot of people talk about, which is running back to the library to find more by this guy.
Yeah, exactly. I sort of inhaled all the juveniles, sort of almost at once. I could really not say, which one was first. I think my mother was turned on to Heinlein by The Puppet Masters, but she decided that was a little too adult for me at the time. So she basically went to the library and got all the juveniles. And I must have, within a few week period, sort of inhaled them all.
Yeah.
And I was gone at that point. I mean, Heinlein was my man.
Now, the
Now,
question...
to clarify, if you don't mind me jumping in here a minute, for those of you that don't know, there are two very distinct periods of Heinlein's writing career. Early on, he was writing short stories and novels for the juvenile market. And that lasted up somewhere in the 50s, I do believe.
Yeah.
if I remember correctly. Then he started writing longer length novels in the 60s and beyond. And when you start to get to the longer stuff is when a lot of the themes that you see that he kind of hints at in the juvenile works start to get spun out into much more greater detail. So there is a very distinct difference between the early Heinlein and the later Heinlein. So when people talk about juveniles, that's what they need. They tend to be about 200 pages long, whereas most of the novels are 400 to 600 plus.
Yeah, but Stranger is basically the watershed.
Stranger is the one that
Well, actually, Starship Troopers came first.
I classify that as a juvenile.
Well,
Though a lot of people
Starship
don't, but-
Troopers is a good bridge book
Yeah,
because it's got elements of both.
It
sort of got a foot in both
It was
camps.
apparently written to be a juvenile, but it was rejected as a juvenile, so it.
It always
the
felt like a
publisher.
juvenile.
Well, I understand why, but,
It does read like some of the juvenile works.
but
Yeah.
it, the themes in it were, I guess, more than the publisher wanted to handle as a juvenile.
So-
You were going to ask about the one, the book of Robert Heinlein's that we like the least. I have a question that occurred to me as I walked in and heard people up here discussing sort of in advance, that it just sort of popped into my mind. People were talking about the ones that walk away. Which of your Robert Heinlein novels don't you have on your shelves right now, and or which don't you expect to get back because they've walked away?
That it goes hand in hand for me, so I'm going to start. Farnham's Freehold is Dreck. It's a really great book until about halfway through he starts writing another one, and then he smooshed them together. I kind of want to tell you, and I kind of don't, because I want to tell you don't read this, and this is why, but I also kind of want you to go out and read it and find out why I don't like it. So I'm kind of torn as to whether or not to give away plot stuff, but it really is like a mashup novel. It's really bizarre. The first half of it I loved, and the second half I'm like, huh?
But not in the same way as Beyond This Horizon.
No, not in quite the same way as Beyond This Horizon, but Farnham's Freehold, the reason why that's my least favorite is because if he had kept with that first half, it would have been wonderful. And then he messed it up. Everyone's allowed an off day, so that's okay.
Me? Okay, I'm gonna say The Number of the Beast. And the reason being is, when you read The Number of the Beast, you know, Heinlein has a very distinct writing style. And it almost seems like, and of course, and again, this is about when he was still having the problems with the carotid arteries, which he actually explained in Expanding the Universe when he went on the operation. And he had to undergo the operation. It's almost like this was obligatory. He really couldn't, he said he couldn't study, he couldn't really, you know, like he did his extensive research like he did before. And it almost seems like he had help with somebody else because it's not the style. I mean, you go back to Stranger in Strangeland, you go to Time Enough for Love. Then after it has that, you go to Friday, and you go maybe Friday, and then Job Comedy of Justice. It's back to the way he written it. It just seems like Number of the Beast was almost like maybe he did have some help, or maybe because he was so blocked up with everything, but he had to pump it out. It just doesn't quite seem to fit.
It was also after a fairly long pause.
Yeah.
In
Yes.
writing.
No doubt because of this problem.
And actually, one other thing, if anyone's read Grumbles from the Grave, which actually Virginia edited, I believe he said that Friday was one of the like therapeutic novel after his operation to see if he could get it back.
Well, he did.
Oh yeah.
I love Friday. I have a rotation of Heinleins that I try to read about every 12 to 18 months, and Friday's part of it.
I think I'm gonna.
You wanna
come in
answer
next
your
because
question?
I want to. The two books you've both come up with, I want to comment on both of them.
Okay.
I would agree